I'm Lila van Tilburg for BizNews, and with me I have the Global Chair of DA Abroad, Ludré Stevens, to tell us what the DA is going to do to get people abroad to vote for the 2024 election. Hi, Ludré.
Hi, Linda. Thank you for having me.
So, do you have this big drive to get the expats to vote?
100%. So the really big news is the IEC is making online registration available for overseas voters next month, which is game-changing. Before, we've had so many hurdles. You couldn't register overseas or even fill your VC10 form. Now you can do that. So it's absolutely game-changing for the overseas voters next year.
So what address would you put? Normally if you wanted to vote here, there would have to be a South African address, wasn't there? But would they have to use,
Yeah, so remember there's two steps for overseas registration. The first one is to get onto the voters roll. Second one is for filling a VC10 form, which is a request for a special vote. Both of these are online now. So if you're already on the voters roll, so if you voted before in South Africa or registered before in South Africa, you're already on the voters roll. You don't need to register. The other thing you have to do is fill in the online VC10 form to say which voting station you want to vote in overseas. Now, that obviously is a big question right now. Where are the voting stations? So previously, it's always been in the capital cities of the country that you live, or the country that you live in. So if it's the UK, it'd be London. If it's Australia, it'd be Canberra. But the DA is fighting a battle to get more voting stations around the world where South Africans are actually based. So instead of Canberra, where hardly anyone lives, to have voting stations in Perth and for example, the UK also have voting stations in Edinburgh and Belfast. So for now, our big request is make sure you register next month online, and then secondly, fill in your VC10 form, because based on where those VC10 forms are signed on at, from those locations, we will say we want voting stations in these other cities around the world.
Yeah, because if you live in Scotland, to go all the way to London, or if you're in Sydney or in Perth, to go all the way, and where was it in the US?
New York and Los Angeles. Only.
Yeah, which is also two coasts, and a lot of people might be living in the south, so that would make a massive difference.
Exactly, and fundamentally, every South African has a right to vote, and we are just saying have the voting station available where there are South Africans ultimately.
The other thing, normally they would want a passport and an ID. Do you know what their requirements are going to be?
Yes, at the moment, it's still the same as previously, which is to have both a passport and South African passport and South African ID. However, we are again working with our colleagues back home on the IEC liaison committee to just request that you only have to have one South African government-issued ID document necessary. Why do you have two documents necessary? It doesn't make any sense. We think that previously this was the case because some people may have lost their dual nationality or the nationality. But now we obviously won that court case recently, which just reinstates that. And so there's no reason why you'd have two forms of ID if both of these are issued by the South African government. So we're working through our colleagues back in SA to get it approved to only have one form, either an ID book or a South African passport.
Can we just run back to that court case? What did that mean?
So DA recently won a court case for South Africans to have the South African nationality reinstated if they lost it inadvertently by not getting permission to have a second citizenship. And this court case was finally won recently, and now the government said they won't appeal it, as we're waiting for the Constitutional Court to confirm that ruling. And that then means anybody who lost their nationality inadvertently gets it reinstated automatically. The exact mechanism will still be worked out, whether you have to notify a request or whether they'll get in touch with you. But the great thing is the government is no longer appealing or fighting it. And so that means thousands of South Africans who lost their nationality inadvertently get it back, which is a huge, huge win for our country and for our people.
Well, which brings me to the numbers. You said thousands. What kind of figures are we looking at? How many South Africans, if all your appeals work, if we get more places where people can vote, if it's easier, just an ID or a passport, how many people would you hope to get to vote in the 2024 elections?
So that's a great question. So basically, usually what happens is to get a MP elected into Parliament, it's usually between 50 and 55,000 votes. We as the DA are aiming to get 2 MPs elected to Parliament with DA votes overseas. So we want about between 100 and 110,000 votes overseas. Now, this is significantly higher than previous elections, but fundamentally it's because of two reasons that we think this is doable. The first one is that overseas registration will be available online now, which before was only in person at these embassies. So it's a huge game changer. But number two, this is a critical election, and people always say it about every single election. But can you imagine if the ANC and the EFF comes to power, how destructive that's going to be for the next 5 years? And then basically, this could potentially be our last re-election before we get completely plunged in darkness with load shedding. And so fundamentally, even if you live overseas for short term or medium term or long term, this election is going to be a game changer. So we call upon everybody who can vote, any South African citizen, to cast your vote, because fundamentally, if we don't get this election done, or at least give people a choice, it is going to be downhill from here ultimately.
And the DA has always done well with the expats. So are you hoping to get most of the votes that would be coming from overseas?
Well, so obviously the DA is working on the Moon Pact election. And so the key thing here is for everybody to vote ultimately. And obviously we want it to be DA votes, because that's who we believe in and what our values and our principles are for. But the DA usually get about 75% of the overseas votes. And then the ANC and the EFF and the Freedom Front also get a fair amount of votes. And so obviously the key thing here is people just to vote en masse, but obviously we want DA votes ultimately.
Or for the other parties in the Moonshot Pact?
So absolutely yes. So I think the big thing is we've seen the last 2 years in coalition politics in South Africa is that a lot of small parties means a lot of instability, which means a lot of government positions flipping back and forth between different coalition setups. And so it is very unstable to have many small parties, because that means you have a lot of division of power ultimately. If you just look at all the DA-led and the DA-managed local governments, with its unemployment rates, with its service delivery and clean government, it is clear that the DA is the only real option over here. And so the one thing is to unseat the ANC government on a national level, just for obvious reasons. But the second thing is you want to have stable politics. And to have stable politics, you have to have, the DA is clearly the front runner in terms of experience, in delivery, in a track record. So it just makes sense to have the DA as the largest party in a coalition, because then it means you have an entire track record you can depend on and count on.
So what is the DA doing apart from trying to make the process easier and putting pressure on the Home Office? And what are you doing? Are you planning to bus people in? What is your campaigning?
Absolutely. So there are 3 different things we're doing right now. The first thing is creating awareness that you can do over online registration and online BizNews forms, because without registration or without the BizNews forms, you just cannot vote overseas. That's the first thing. The second thing is we are mobilizing our volunteers all around the world to amplify our message. So obviously overseas, you can't go do door-to-door canvassing like you do in SA to make the case to vote for DA. Overseas, you do it through your social networks on Facebook and WhatsApp and the like. And so we need people all around the world to help us amplify the DA's message, that is of why it's so important to vote DA for a stable political government going forward. So we're doing the make sure that you register online. We're mobilizing people around the world. And then thirdly, we have an active campaign to get the IEC to make voting fair and accessible overseas, which is the one form of ID, more voting stations around the world, and voting also on weekend days, not weekdays. So it is mobilization, advocacy, and obviously mobilizing our people around the world.
Would you be try to get the election over more than one day? In other words, ask the IEC to make it available for more than...
So we have to follow what happens in SA, otherwise it seems to people have unfair advantage overseas. So previously what's happened in 2009, 2014, you could only vote on the same day as people voted in SA, which before was the middle of the week, and that means that thousands of people have to take annual leave days overseas. In the last election, 2019, we were able to vote on a Saturday, a week or two in advance of the SA election. I think for now, we're probably okay with that, given that still has to be in person at this point, that for it to be on a weekend. And And obviously, there's the mechanism to do that is that your name gets crossed off on the voter roll, and you also get the ink on your thumb. Now, I don't think we were able to change that. And so for now, I think as long as it's on a weekend day, that's probably sufficient for us to get over the mark. Of course, we want more access, like more voting days, and also obviously eventually online voting as well. Because you can do online banking. There's no reason why I can't do online voting. But for this election, as long as it's again on the weekend and in more voting stations around the world, then that should be sufficient.
Well, you've mentioned that they might ask you to have a passport and a ID, and there has been massive problems with issuing passports at, especially I know in the UK there's been problems at South Africa House or the Commission, but then they got another company in. Has that made a difference to how fast people are getting passports, renewal, ID cards?
It is an absolute mess, I must tell you. So in the UK, they have now introduced VFS to help them with it. It's starting to make a bit of a dent in it, but it's still not fit for purpose. We still have the same issues around the world, months and months of times for waiting to get an appointment from New Zealand all the way to the States, and it's just not fit for purpose. Obviously, our argument is that fundamentally you need to have one form of SA issued ID document to go vote. Obviously, the supportive thing for that is because the overseas processes are in such shambles, it just makes our case even more ultimately. But we at the DA Abroad have a capable Home Affairs campaign on the go, where we help people who have an absolute uphill battle to get these things renewed, get the queries escalated via channels in SA. So we're continuously working on a capable Home Affairs campaign. But you're absolutely right. So it just makes it even worse, the fact that you can't apply for your passport overseas in time, then for them to say, well, you have to have your passport in order to vote. It just makes our case even more so why only one SA issued ID document should be required. So this election coming up is fundamental in the sense that we have the first time the ability to have real elections in the sense that we have political fluidity. By that I mean for the last 2 decades we've only had ANC, national government, guaranteed coming in. And before that we had decades of national party, national government coming in no matter what. With our local elections 2 years ago, where for the first time we were on a national level exposed to coalition politics, the first time that there was fluidity and where every single vote meant that one seat, one council could change that government. And I think we're going to be in the same position when it comes up to this election next year, where it could be 1 or 2 or 3 seats that determines who forms majority coalition government. And one seat can mean instability or stability, especially if there's one or two partners who are known to be flip-flopping left, right, and center. And so what is so exciting about this is there's fluidity. Every single vote counts. And so people who are sick and tired of load shedding and corruption and not service delivery, this is their chance to make a real difference. And that's why we're making this big call on people overseas. We can register online to vote. We ask more voting stations. One seat makes a difference in coalitions. And it's fundamental that we all just, make the effort and go vote, which is so exciting. It's so exciting that we can actually vote when there's political fluidity, and so we better do this.
Okay, Ludré Stevens, Global Chair of the DA Abroad, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Linda.